In this podcast, I talk with my brother Steve, who owns and manages a consulting company with reach into Australia, Southeast Asia, and now into the US. And we learn about his global perspective on Tasmanian mining, also on the future of things like the energy systems, talk about the green movement, and so on. So if you're interested in hearing more about mining from a global perspective from somebody who grew up on the Northwest, then listen to this broadcast. So welcome back to the broadcast, or should I say the BroadCast, because we've got another broadcast with my brother Stephen Broad. So back to Steve. Welcome back, Steve, to the broadcast.
Thanks, Shane. It's great to host you here at the Resource Lounge.
So the Resource Lounge here, so we've better do a bit of a recap. But so Steve's obviously has these businesses, resource mine management, but also American mine management, and we're at his Redcliffe office, which is on the outskirts of Brisbane. Just a bit of a recap about Steve's journey from being a 15-year-old farm boy, getting an apprenticeship, becoming a tradesman, and then working all around Australia, even overseas, then becoming a mine manager, and then starting his own business. So maybe if you could do a bit of a better recap than that, Steve, see what you reckon.
Yeah, so started quite young, 15, in the mining industry, and then pretty well qualified and moved to Western Australia, followed my friends over there on a bit of a journey and adventure, and then worked across Australia and then overseas, and was fortunate enough to work in some supervision management roles, and also in managing mine sites and a broader context of managing asset management across quite a large mining group in Australia.
And then, of course, COVID hit, you took a redundancy and then started your own business, which started off as resource mine management. And now, of course, you've also set up a business in America, the American mine management. So just tell us a bit about this office that we're in now in Redcliffe.
Yeah, so we've got an office in Brisbane, we've got an office in Redcliffe, and we manage the back of house here in Redcliffe, so look after our accounts and everything else that we do. And yes, it's the hub of our business, the heart and soul of it.
And the Resource Lounge here actually looks pretty groovy. It looks even better with that light lit up, but it's playing havoc with the cameras, so we better dodge that. But also you spend a fair bit of time in America right now. So tell us, what's the difference, do you think, between operating in Australia and operating in America?
One of the key differences is in the US you don't have a defined trade structure. So in Australia, there is a government-regulated trade structure through the Australian Quality Training Framework. And it's actually the government in each state that issues your trade papers. In the US, none of that exists. So there's some private companies doing private trades, or you have technical colleges putting people through what's like a vocational course like you would do before getting a trade. But it's very unregulated, so the skills levels is very different to Australia, because in Australia you have a base set of skills that someone has that you get with a trade. You don't get that in the US, so that's a key difference. The other difference is people are very much more accepting of mining. It seems like the community is getting behind mining and understands the benefit it gives to the communities rather more so than they do in Australia.
Yeah, okay, so you talk about that qualification framework. Does that mean if I wanted to be a welder, I could just put a sign up on the outside of my house and say Shane Broad welder, and then I could get cracking and no issues?
Absolutely. You could turn up to work one day and I go, Shane, you're going to be a high voltage electrician.
You're kidding? Really?
Not kidding at all.
Oh wow, that would be a bit different. Not sure what the what people whose high voltage electricity that I'd be wiring up would think about that.
Well, even as much as part of renovations, you can do your own plumbing and you can wire your own home.
Wow, that sounds pretty incredible. So what sort of challenges does that give you when you're operating in the US and you're trying to run a mine or trying to get good quality staff?
It really depends the communities that you're operating in. Like one of our really good clients in particular, they're in a non-mining region. Fantastic location, one of the best locations in mining. But because there's not any other mining within 1,000 kilometres of this operation, there's not the skill sets there, and they have quite a new operation, and they've got to develop that locally or try and import the skills and entice people to live in the region and bring people into the region who do have the skills. where if you were in an Elko, Nevada or somewhere like that, you've got 4 or 5 different mines operating in the area. So you're typically, there's a bit of churn and burn in all of the operations. So you'll get people who are working around the mines from one to one. But all it means to them, if they change operation, they go out their driveway, they put the indicator on in a different direction in the morning. To entice them to move over to where our client's mine is, they've got to sell their house, they've got to buy a house, they've got to relocate their family, they've got to find a school, all those sort of things. So that becomes a real challenge.
Well, does that also mean when you train people up, they're obviously not getting poached either? So it works the other direction, does it? Or?
Well, building the skill set locally, like the easiest way to keep people locally is employ local people, and that's a big thing. So we've been helping this particular client establish an apprenticeship program, which is close to my heart. I feel that all mining companies should add to the pool of labour rather than just take from it.
So you've got a bit of sort of a global perspective now in your operation. So your resource mine management's heavily involved in Australian mining and sort of local, regional, so into Indonesia and maybe other countries, but then the American, so you've got that American perspective as well. So where do you think things are at globally?
Globally, it's a really tough time in the mining industry. We're quite fortunate that gold and copper are doing quite well, but lead, zinc, base metals, and particularly nickel for its own reasons is struggling very much so, and coal as well. Coal's got a couple issues. One's around prices come down, but also the operating costs have increased quite significantly post-COVID, which is a real challenge to the profit margins. And where we are here in Queensland, they've also got some royalty issues that are going on, which is really, really hurting the coal mining industry in this state.
So that was like an election promise to raise, pre-election, wasn't it, to raise royalties on coal that hasn't been turned back now that there's a Liberal National Party in power. Is that right?
I don't believe it was mentioned at an election at all, but the state soon found out about it after, and it has been a real bugbear of the mining industry. And it's also cost us a lot of investment from other areas in the mining industry, because these type of decisions, and they affect future investment decisions. So it not only affects investment in the coal industry, base metals, oil and gas, like you name it, people are going to think twice because they've got this political risk element to their investments now in Queensland.
So we'll just go back a couple of steps. You talked about the problems in nickel, because obviously that was a big issue in Tasmania with Avebury. So Avebury nickel mine shut or has been put into care and maintenance, and that's been the case a number of nickel mines around the country in Australia. So what's actually driving that, do you think, from your point of view?
It's definitely, producers really struggle with laterite nickel, which is shallower ore bodies, lower grade, and a more intense processing than sulfide nickel. And what's happened is the Chinese investment into Indonesia about value adding their minerals. They put a law that you're not allowed to export ore. It's created a lot of Chinese investment in the nickel industry, and they were really able to crack the code around how to produce laterite nickel and make money out of it. And they're making margins at a really depressed price and flooding the industry with nickel and cobalt as well.
So, is there any chance of that turning around in time soon, or is it something we're going to have to get used to, or where do you think that actual nickel picture's at?
Nickel's always a tough one. Like they say that it leads a boom up and it leads a boom down, it leads a crisis down. So, it is hard to say. Indonesia may choose to regulate harder than they have, or we may have a genuine supply shock in the industry, or it could even be negative that we go away from nickel in some of the batteries that we're using now, and that may even make things worse. So there's a lot of uncertainty in the industry, and uncertainty reflects in price, particularly when there's an excess volume in the market.
So the other thing that I suppose has a Tasmanian context is gold. So gold's gone in completely the other direction. So I suppose we better talk about that. So you're working with some gold clients and the price is extraordinary. And what's going on there?
Oh, it's just like, I was surprised when it went to 2,500 an ounce, and it's currently 4,500 an ounce US. So it's just a time that we have never seen in the industry. And I've mentioned in a previous podcast we did that I've seen gold at sub 300 an ounce, which was an absolute crisis. And I wish I bought some of it then, I can tell you, because wow, it's but it's there for a reason, right? And those reasons can go, and there's no such thing as a boom forever, and it will come back and correct. And a big part of our business, what we do is we actually help a lot of clients through the tougher times around fiscal discipline, capital discipline, how to get smart money out of their budget, not cut the dumb money, cut the smart money out, and how to make their assets run harder, faster, for longer and cheaper. So it's a big part of our business. So we're well positioned to help people on both sides of the cycle.
So also having that diversity between your operation, your resource mine management and your American mine management is also a bit of a risk management for you as well, wouldn't it be? Like having those different operations is a bit of a hedge in a way, or?
It is like working in the US is different. Like company structures are very, very different, and initially it was quite hard to get our head around that, but now we're there, we're quite comfortable around the taxation and tax flow through to Australia and how much you have to pay to Australia and the US. So that risk element of it, we've done quite well understanding that and maturing the business. But the industry in the US is vastly different because some of the things that are happening in the US, and it might be a bit sensitive for Australia, but tariffs and things like that. But what I will say is I'm definitely non-political in the US. However, one of the regions that we work in was a single company town, a cotton mill. And that cotton mill had been there forever and a day, and it was owned by a family. It wasn't a multinational, it was just a family that had done well, established cotton mills, and they'd invested a lot of money. And then the North America Free Trade Agreement come in, and that was shut overnight. But that factory moved to Mexico overnight, and it absolutely decimated the whole region and put it into this mini depression for many, many years. And it's only started to correct now that our client has 600 plus jobs in the region and driving a lot more with the contractors and suppliers in the region, and start to bring wealth back to that region. So it's pretty hard to say to someone in those regions that tariffs aren't a good idea when they've seen the opposite play out. Now, we all know from an economics point of view what tariffs mean, and it ultimately means people pay higher prices for products where they're being purchased. But there's an example where a local region has been significantly affected by a free trade agreement, and they see it as a positive thing.
So that transition piece is always very difficult as well. So you're talking about now the support in the region for that particular mine. So what would you say about the support for mining in the US versus Australia, and indeed versus what you see for support for mining in Tasmania?
Well, for example, they've just made coal a critical mineral in the US for its steelmaking, the importance of steelmaking, because we can't get to net zero without steel, and we can't make steel at volume without coal. It's an important part of the coking process, and to make it, there's just no substitute. And you've seen a walk back of some of the approvals processes, which really affect the Australian operations. Taking 10 years to and having to have a judicial review to open a new mine in Queensland is incredible. What kind of company? And then we see what's happening in New South Wales with some of the particular gold project down there, and some of the environmental activism and some of the stuff that's happening there, and the decisions. It's you shouldn't have to get a judicial review to get a mine approved, and that seems where we're going, and they're taking 10 years plus. So do you really want to tie your money up to spend money to find a mine? You've got to invest in the exploration, and you're going to invest your money in the exploration where you know you can actually mine it. And Tasmania's seen as a very hard place to actually get a mine up and running. Like we've seen some of the just smaller operations have their real challenge to get up and running. And Tasmania, when you look back to the 40s, 50s, 60s, you found these massive ore bodies that are still being mined today. And you look back and go, since the 80s, what's really happened? You've had Henty, which you'd struggle to call a world-class mine, but it's been a good producer, around 100,000 ounces a year. And then you've got Hellier, where I did the bulk of my apprenticeship. But Hellier was really an extension of Kew River, so you could call that a brownfields rather than a greenfields type discovery. So we're just not seeing the money or the investment to find these world-class ore bodies and bring these large tier one mining companies back to the state.
So, I mean, how does that you've talked about the east coast a bit. How does that compare to Western Australia, for example, in your opinion? Like, they seem to get things going a bit quicker there.
Yeah, Western Australia has a whole different framework that, I'm not as experienced in Western Australia, but when working at Premier Coal, did see what it takes, but certainly the ability to get some of the large iron ore mines developed just seems a lot more friendly in WA. You've also got better access to energy in Western Australia due to a certain amount of the gas being held back for the domestic industry, and therefore you can use that to generate electricity, for your mine and run it at a cheaper cost as well. So those sort of things really, really help. Like power cost is a huge cost to a mining operation, and if you can't get it, or you can't get it economically, then you're in huge challenge. And again, we look back to that golden era of Tasmania, the 60s, and the hydro and the cheap energy. You saw Bell Bay, Temco, Tioxide, and of course you had the pulp paper mills. So you've gone from a state that's had a huge amount of industry to slowly it's been this winding back of industry. And Bell Bay's power's that expensive, rather than the government making power cheaper. They're technically going around and subsidising all this heavy industry, whether it's Nearstar in Hobart or Tomago Aluminium. They're almost substituting their power price rather than spending the money to make it cheaper for everyone.
So that's across the eastern seaboard as well, though. So it's not just Tasmania.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, but the power's interconnected from Queensland all the way down to Tasmania and across to South Australia. So yeah, it's one network, all managed by AEMO, and and is sold on a rolling 5-minute auction.
So you've had experience in Tasmania, but obviously more experience on the mainland, and now branching into the US. So like, if we're going to get Tasmanian, like, a lot of people don't actually realise that half of Tasmania's exports are minerals. That's so it's quite a significant industry for Tasmania, and yet a lot of people don't actually realise that. But what would we actually need to do you think, to take it maybe to another level?
Well, firstly, you have to find the minerals to mine. So you've got to encourage exploration, and whether that's government-funded gravitational studies. I know they've done electromagnetic ones before, which created some opportunity, but we need to do some government kickstart, or even government. This is my view, and obviously not your view, but do you encourage people and take an equity stake in exploration companies as a government? I don't know, but you really need to kickstart exploration, because one thing I can guarantee is you'll not find the next world-class ore body unless you're looking for it.
Yeah. So I suppose we just better talk for a second about the standards that are actually required to get investment money. So the JORC standard, and the before people will even look at you. Do you want to just walk us through? Like, if we were going to start the Broad mining company, and we got an exploration licence and we started drilling, what would we actually need before people would even look at us as an investment?
Well, first you need money to do that.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And people tend to back the people at that stage, and then you've got to mobilise you probably do a ground study, some soil samples. If you're fortunate enough, you might do some gravitational studies, or or the likes, or seismic studies, and then get drill targets, and then you've got to drill, and then you go through your various levels of your JORC, your inferred,
Well, you better,
defined.
I suppose you better just explain that a little bit in a little bit more detail for people who don't actually understand or follow this whole process.
So I'll start by saying I'm not a geologist, Shane, so I'll start there. But essentially, it's an element of saying that, we think in this area we've got this because these are the signs that tell us, and then you've got to refine that model. So you do that by essentially higher definition drilling. So you might start at a spacing of 500 metres, and then eventually you go narrow and narrow as you're defining your ore body, and it goes up the JORC level. And all the JORC level is a level of confidence that it's there, and your final JORC levels are, can you actually mine it and make a profit? And then it can become a JORC resource. Very basic overview from a non-geologist.
So, but the key part about that is actually getting the finance then, isn't it? So finance is very difficult, even for the large miners, and getting things going. So risk is an issue, and that risk comes in, which different forms, which is, you talk about the risk.
So firstly, there's political risk. If I find it, can I develop it? That's a big question. Then you've got, if I find it and I can develop it, can I make a profit? So that's your next element of risk. And when you look back to Avebury, they found a good ore body. They built the processing plant, but then I believe they had some issues around some of the content of the ore, which made it harder to market, sell, or refine the product. So that was ultimately, created this issue for them. And then you had the falling nickel price, which again ultimately ended up in the closure of the mine.
So in a place like Avebury, there's been a couple of goes at it. And we've also got this massive project, which is Queenstown, so copper mines of Tasmania. So if we could get that one going, it'd change the state. It'd definitely change Queenstown on the west coast. But what sort of is standing in the way of getting something like that going, do you think?
So not close to that one, Shane, but what I will say with the copper price as it is, it's quite strong, and the forward-looking future. So if not now, when? And that's a question you really got to direct at the owners. What do they need to do? And they are quite a large company, and they're dispersed around the world. And there's a battle for capital in any operation, and they're going to spend the capital where they get the highest return. And if they see that Queenstown's going to get them a good return, they'll invest the money there. But other than that, that's probably a question for the owners of the operation.
Yeah. So what sort of barriers do you see in Tasmania? You've talked a little about political risk, transport, getting people, skills. What other challenges would you see in Tasmania?
It's basically those, Shane. Like getting, we see issues even building a tailings dam for an existing operation that's been running, I believe, close to 100 years, and can't build a tailings dam, and you get all this political pressure. So, would you invest your money there, or would you invest it in the US where it's still regulated, people are still going to do the right thing, they're still not going to build something willy-nilly and create damage, but they can do it a lot easier and not have that massive pushback? Or do even Europe's easier to build a mine than it is in Australia and Tasmania.
So where do you see things going, like in terms of trends in mining in Australia? See this electrification piece, or we're trying to reduce carbon outputs. Where are things heading?
Yeah, definitely decarbonisation, and one of the challenges with the industry is they've really got to lead decarbonisation, because you can't have a net zero world without net zero minerals to develop the electricity for that. The world needs a huge amount of power and energy just to sustain the net zero by 2050, and you can't do that without with the current minerals that we have and the carbon footprint of them. So the mining industry is actually leading that. Electrification is massive. Like if you're ordering assets nowadays, you're tending to look at assets that you can future-proof. If I buy a mechanical drive large mining truck, can I make that a battery truck in the future? You know, that's a tough question. People are, but if I buy an electric drive truck, can I do that a lot easier? Yes, I can. And there's some other things that are happening. You know, our business spends a lot of time. We build a lot of intellectual property around the modelling and also the implementation of a lot of these technologies. We've been quite fortunate to work with a number of tier one mining companies about these problems in their businesses, and it's something that really, really excites us. You know, we've worked on decarbonisation across a whole portfolio of assets. We've worked on electrification of greenfields mining sites. I've also done an exciting one around you know, more the transition piece, and that's where I feel we can spend a lot more time and effort rather than focusing on 2050 and trying to get the technology today that we need for 2050. There's an element around, well, what can we do with the technology and the assets that we have now that will assist us get there? And you know, electric drive trucks is a fantastic one. You know, three large mining trucks, say 300 tonne. When it's going downhill, it's generating a lot of energy, and they burn that energy off to form a braking force. So each one of those trucks is burning off enough electricity to power 1,000 homes. That's a lot of energy, and it might do that for 20 minutes every hour. So you think, how can I harness that energy to offset the diesel that I need? And that hybrid type truck is something that we've worked on with a couple of people, and it really, really excites me because you've got the chance to significantly reduce the fuel usage over that asset, and it's economically viable today if we just implemented that technology rather than going straight to a battery truck. How can I make the diesel truck more efficient? Another world first that we worked on is with a client in the US, and that was around turning a tier 2 truck into a tier 4 truck, so a better emissions standing, and it was one of the first ones in the world that has been done in the particular model and the particular engine that we use, and that was a great one. So less fuel, less emissions, faster asset, and all done for a cheaper price.
But also, isn't there another point where less maintenance? Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So the particular option that we looked at for this truck, it didn't have what you call DEF, diesel exhaust fluid, which is ammonia or AdBlue that you use to creates a lot of downtime in some models of truck. Treat the nitrous oxides, or what we call NOx, treat that final portion of the emissions by putting ammonia into the exhaust system. And with this particular choice and working with Rolls-Royce MTU at the time, we were able to come up with an option that had none of it. You know, it doesn't have DEF, doesn't have anything like that. So we've just eliminated one of the largest downtime elements for that asset. Also, when you're talking the hybrid option, you know, if you're not using the engine as much, it's going to last longer per truck hour. And there's a few exciting things that we think you can do there to really extend the engine lives. In recent years, you know, we've worked with clients to extend engine lives from 24,000 hours to 35,000 hours. That's got a huge environmental benefit. You know, you've got all that steel, all that iron now going for a longer period of time. So that's really, you know, another element of extending the lives of these assets. So you're not having to, you know, make a new asset and expend all that energy and carbon doing it.
So also there's the underground piece too, isn't there? Electrification, sort of reducing the diesel particulates and making things, you know, less ventilation and stuff. So talk us through what's going on underground as well, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so I've been fortunate enough to have a look at one particular OEM's battery underground loaders, or LHDs. I've had a good look over them, and you know, given my thoughts there. What we see with the haulage providers, I think, is a really realistic option. They're looking more so at the hybrid option. I see that you know, Epiroc has just brought a truck into Western Australia that's a hybrid, so as it's driving down into the mine, is capturing all this energy from its braking as it's driving down in the mine, that it can use to either increase haulage speed coming up and reduce your overall truck numbers, or offset fuel as it's coming up. So what a great option, and looking forward to seeing more of them running in the mining industry.
So we see this sort of innovation happening, and I think it's fair to say that there's Tasmanian businesses that are right at the cutting edge of that sort of innovation. So
Yes.
what sort of interaction have you got with some of these Tasmanian players, even on the global scale?
Yeah, so it's a bit ironic that we're in a mine in the US, and we've got an Elphinstone grader there, right? I tell people that comes from where I come from, and they look at me and go, "Really?" Yeah, and it's a really nice little asset. But also some of the work Elphinstone's doing around the support equipment is really good, and they're developing a really quality product, but also supported by the Caterpillar network around the world, which is another important thing. It's one thing to build them, but you've also got to support them as well, and they've really cracked the code on that one, and developing those as well.
So I suppose we've got this sort of mining situation in Tasmania where there hasn't been a new mine opened up for a long time. Basically, we've got, I think you could probably say stagnation. We've had mines shut recently.
Yeah.
So yet we've got all this innovation that's still happening in the manufacturing sector. So how do those two things not fit together, where we've got innovation in mining and innovation in manufacturing?
I think they're two separate industries, really. Like that, one supports the mining industry, and the engineering team with Caterpillar Underground still being based in Burnie. I think we could thank Dale Elphinstone for that, and they're still working on some great products there. Some that I can't talk about, but because they've been told in confidential terms, but certainly they've got a diesel electric underground loaders, 2900 XE, that's been really welcomed in the mining industry, and doing great things as well.
So is there anything you think that Tasmania could do from maybe infrastructure or from regulation that could actually get things moving a bit quicker?
Well, if you want industry to come to Tasmania, you need cheaper power, cheaper electricity, and bring the value adding of the minerals, and make sure that we keep those that we got, make sure we keep Bell Bay, make sure we keep Near Star, and those operations running well into the future, but also giving the businesses that own them confidence to invest their capital in them for the future, because otherwise you're just burning down an asset until you effectively close it. You've got to give people confidence, whether it's Labor, whether it's Liberal, you all need to come together and give people confidence that things are going to be good into the future, and it's known. And energy is the big unknown at the moment. The industrial power price is, it's a rolling auction. We have this competition between baseload power and renewables that lives out every morning from dawn. From dawn we see power go into negatives, and so that means that people are actually giving money to the network provider to put their energy on, and then we see the opposite happen at dusk. We see the baseload people going, you're not online anymore, I need to recover some money. So you see the opposite, and we just need stability, and I feel we need more baseload energy in the market, and we need to encourage the renewables to store and put their energy into the market at a more appropriate time than just flooding it during daylight hours or windy times.
So this transition piece has been obviously very political over the last, say, decade or so, and we're seeing this transition play out, and obviously your industry in mining is a massive user of electricity. So how do you see this transition playing out? What are some of the issues that you're seeing from your point of view?
Well, firstly, for this transition to happen, we actually need a lot more energy, right? So you think, you have that 1,000 homes worth of energy that a truck is recovering going downhill. Well, it needs that same amount of energy to go uphill, right? So let's talk a large mine site with 100, 250 of those trucks, and they're coming on off charge. If they're battery, you've got this big swinging swinging load, so it's going to be a real challenge for the mining industry, for the generators, and without that spinning reserve, it's going to be a real challenge to make the balance of all that work. It's astronomical.
So that big demand, the huge drawdowns that a massive engine like on a mining truck takes, or an excavator or whatever it is, that will have caused huge fluctuations in the requirement for energy, no matter how it's run, I suppose, whether it's base load or whether it is sort of infrequent. So how, like at a mine site level, how does that sort of play out? Do you need sort of more mine site storage to try and even handle those peaks and troughs at the site level?
Yeah, well, this is the problem no one's really solved. So we've certainly got our ideas, and one of them that I'll share with you. I won't share all of them with you, but one I'll share is repurposing old batteries out of your mining assets to create a load bank on a site to take those fluctuations out at a site level, and also time shift away from peak periods. The 6 or 7 o'clock at night. When solar's coming off and base load's adjusting to shift that. So, in a haul truck, a battery may cycle 2 or 3 times an hour, and the battery's life is dictated by how deep you draw the power down and how often you cycle it. So, if you were to take it out after it reached its optimal cycles in the mobile asset and use that in a bank, maybe it cycles 2 or 3 times a day. So you can really get a long life out of that, and we feel that you've got to try and really balance the load at the operations.
So that will obviously require huge investments at the site. So I suppose that adds to the complexity of the transition.
Well, it does, but the more people that are doing this, the more frequently and the more baseload power you have, the easier it is to happen. And when we look to other parts of the world, that's why nuclear energy is a big part of what they do around the world. And where I spend a lot of time in the US, we've got 3 nuclear generators around us that have been in operation for 50 plus years. They're safe, they've had no issues, and they're generating carbon-free power, and will continue to do for another 50 years.
So what's also the energy balance there in the US? So they've got some coal stations, they've got gas, have they, nuclear, and they've got renewables as well. So what's the sort of mix that we're seeing there in the US?
Yeah, a lot of gas, less coal, a lot of gas and nuclear. So when we talk about carbon-free steel, they're making it in the US. They've got a big steel recycling industry there. And they've got electric arc furnaces using recycled iron and nuclear energy, carbon-free, baseload power, and they're doing that quite successfully.
So what about other jurisdictions like Canada, for example? They've also got an interesting mix too, don't they?
Yeah, they tend to have a lot more hydro, but definitely got nuclear and a mixture of some coal there as well.
And then Australia, we're very heavily tied to coal. So, well, what is it sitting at the moment? 60% coal in Australia, or has it dropped a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's dropped slightly a little bit, but it's dropped. But you've got these big coal generators running their plants at maybe 60% efficiency, because they don't want to generate as much power, because they know that you can't fluctuate them like within 1 hour, 2 hours. So they know that as soon as solar comes online, they've got to compete with a product that they can't. And while solar is purported to be cheaper, when you look at it over the 24-hour period, 360 days of the year, and the fact that they don't build the infrastructure and don't have to store their energy to create base load, then I really struggle to see that as being anywhere near cheaper than baseload coal out of places like Kogan Creek in Queensland, for example.
So what's Kogan Creek?
Kogan Creek is a high efficiency, low emissions power station. It's the newest coal-fired power station in Queensland. Single boiler, I think it's around 600 megawatts. It'll be the last place to close in the country. Yeah, it's a really efficient, well-run operation. Got a mine right next to it, coupled to the coupled to the power station.
So one of the big issues obviously playing out in Tasmania at the moment is the Marinus project, so trying to maximise the benefits of our hydro dams, and then build more wind turbines and so on. And then you're talking about the times of the day where you actually get paid to take power, trying to clip that ticket as hard as we can as a state. That project's obviously been a bit controversial. We've got a situation in Tasmania where our power prices are rising. Where do you see that sort of project in the scheme of things across Australia?
Well, no one really wants poles and wires in their backyard, right? Let's face it. And because with renewables we need, up to 3 times the amount of energy at peak times to give you that 100% that you actually need all of the time, right? So it's this balance. So you need a lot more transmission ability to, like, when, for example, when the power price is right, to get that energy from Tasmania across to the mainland, or opposite, when there's a really low energy price, to import all that power as quickly as you can for your pumped hydro and to get the water in your upper storage facility of your pumped hydro. So you need the ability to quickly get energy and to either export it or import it in Tasmania, and that's where Marinus comes into it, I believe.
Also that idea of spinning momentum too. The hydro dams deliver that spinning momentum, stop those brownouts, like apparently happened in Spain. Part of the problem there was the lack of spinning momentum, something that's spinning like a turbine, holding the energy system up.
I had a bit of a chuckle. There was recently something come out about all these synchronous whatevers they were are needed around there, and when you did it, no one knew what they were, but everyone was talking in the news that day like they did because an AEMO report or something like that come back out. So everyone was rushing to find out what they are, and what it is basically a big motor using a lot of energy to keep a lot of momentum, something heavy and spinning to create that momentum. So if there is a draw on the power, then that you've got the ability to fight it, rather than your modern day batteries, when it gets to a certain amount of hertz, they'll just cut off. They'll just automatically shut them down. That's what I believe was the issue in Spain, where with spinning momentum, like a large steam turbine or a hydro, it will actually fight. It will turn and fight and try and fight its way out of that, and that's what prevents blackouts. Like when you had the issues in Queensland with Callide B, I think when that had its hydrogen explosion, that it was really having a lot of spinning momentum left in those other coal operators, which is what stopped the whole east coast of Australia blacking out.
Yeah, well, that's something, like a lot of these situations, when it's complex to explain, then it's easy to run the opposite argument that you don't need a particular thing. Where do you see things going out in the energy market? I mean, you're obviously a big fan of coal, but you're also in the industry. So just where's Tasmania going to fit into that bigger picture as well in that transition piece?
I might just throw a point of order there, Shane. I'm a firm believer of the transition, but what we see in the political and media, that is a belief that we don't need a transition, we just need to go from A to B. So we want to go from this 1980s technology, let's say the Holden Commodore, straight to a Tesla, and we know there was a lot of things that we did in between around emissions control, unleaded fuel, electronic injection in cars, and then ultimately hybrid before we go to the Tesla. So, I'm a supporter of coal as a part of that transition, and I think if Australia really sat down and had a good think, and you were allowed to have a decent argument, I think the rest of Australia would be too. Just like they're starting to warm now to gas being part of the solution, and it was only 2 years ago that gas was seen. No, you can't use gas as part of the transition, but there's been a warming to the reality that needs to happen. Recently we had a report out that said that we need to use coal to generate electricity until 2050. Right, that's the transition. It's net zero by 2050, and there'll also be technology that comes along the way that helps play. So the journey that we think it is at the moment may not necessarily be the journey that gets us to where we need to be. But what we do know is high high efficiency, low emissions coal plants have in the order of 40% less emissions than your traditional older generation. So, yeah, what can we do to keep them running? Gas is a transition. Hydro is a really, really good option, but very expensive, and we won't even talk about Snowy 2.0 and however many billions that is today, and how many billions it'll be before they finish it. But there's a reluctance to build hydro now because that's blown out so much. But what you've got, Tassie's sitting in this awesome place that it's got all this infrastructure already built, and to me, I have a little bit of a chuckle that the whole Greens movement in Australia was started about protesting a renewable energy project on the west coast of Tasmania. So I find that slightly ironic again, but that's my point of view.
And we do like pointing out that their alternative was a coal-fired power plant in the Fingal Valley. But anyway, I think they would argue that times have moved on. But yeah, we do have that.
Yeah, but times have moved on, but we need to have an adult conversation around, what does the transition look like, and should we be burning brown coal in Victoria where 20% of the 20% plus of the energy it takes to dry it out so it'll even burn, right? Or should we be burning coal in high efficiency, low emissions? That's what China's doing. They're shutting down the high emissions one and building more low emission ones because they're transitioning, and I think that they've just announced something like 200 nuclear power plants in China is part of their strategy as well. So ultimately they're going to get there, but we need to have that adult conversation around how we're going to get there and not rule things in and rule them out, and that's what I see as the issue, Shane.
So let's just go back a couple of steps and talk about the demand, because I don't think people probably understand the increase in demand that we'll see. So have you got any figures that you could throw at me in terms of demand, like from the US or the like, about how much more additional power they're going to actually need to make a transition to net zero, to electrification?
Yeah, so Princeton University did a really good study, and don't take these figures as gospel. But off
the top of your head.
Off the top of my head. So in the US, in renewable energy, there needs to be created more energy than currently exists in the world needs to be generated in the US under some of the scenarios that Princeton tested. So that is a huge amount of steel, copper, lithium, or whatever combination battery you're using just to get there. Now that's under the scenario that you don't use carbon capture and you don't use gas, right? So that's under those particular scenarios. But as you see the technologies of carbon capture and gas come back into it, that energy need halves more. So you need a lot less energy to actually get to where you need to be. So I think that's the reality the world's going to find in the next 5 to 10 years when they go, why isn't this working?
So also the efficiency will be an issue then too, won't it? We'll also need more efficient use of electricity rather than just doubling or tripling the amount of electricity generated.
Yeah, and there was a really good, at the Tasmanian mining conference that I was at recently. The particular name, sorry, Shane?
Yeah, the TMEC, the Tasmanian Minerals and Energy Council.
Yeah.
Very good conference, that one.
Yeah, it was, and I was fortunate enough to be asked to speak down there around green energy transition in mining beyond the Tier 1 operations. But one of the ones there was just around how energy efficiency is the new renewable energy and some of the savings that you can have in a factory, for instance, just from changing your control systems, the type of motors you're using, and understanding the load and demand a lot better, and also shifting times of operations to get around from those peak loads. So yeah, efficiency is absolutely a huge thing. When we look at renewables, it's all about inefficiency. Generate 3 times more than what you need just to use one of them, right? That doesn't seem very practical to me, and I don't think it seems very practical to anyone, to be honest.
Well, thank you very much for giving us your perspective of, we've covered a fair bit of ground there, from the difference between America and Australia and Tasmania, but also that energy transition piece. So thank you very much for that. Any sort of last tidbits of wisdom before we call it quits?
Because someone didn't want to bring any excess luggage with him, I'll present Shane with my very own resource mine mug.
Well, it was. We were just in a little bit of a rush to leave, so we're sorry. The broadcast mug is in the mail, along with a 2026 calendar. But I'll definitely make sure that that'll be sitting on your bookshelf. But thanks very much for the resource mine management mug. Thank you very much.
And secondly, Shane, because you're in Queensland and it's very sunny, I want to keep that Shanium not free from sun, so you'll have American Mine Management hat there for you. Enjoy.
So this is actually a very trendy trucker's hat. So hang on, I'll take out the bit of cardboard that's inside it there. So I think this American hat, what it's actually done is made my forehead even bigger, Steve. So
some would say more proportionate, Shane.
Oh, right, okay. Look like, this is definitely going to get a bit of a run along maybe it might sit on the office shelf, or it might get on my head as I walk downtown. And so thanks very much for that, Steve. Thank you very much for being on the broadcast, and we look forward to obviously hearing more about your operations down the track. Very proud of what you've done, and thank you for being on the broadcast. And like as I normally say, if you like this sort of content, make sure that you like and share and subscribe to this channel. We'll keep putting out podcasts like this. I think we'll keep on exploring what we can do in the Tasmanian economy to get things cracking, including mining, because as I pointed, that half our exports are actually minerals, so anything we can do there will help all Tasmania. So that's all for the broadcast from this time, or the BroadCast. Thanks to Stephen Broad for coming on, and until next time, that's it from me. Thank you very much. So welcome back to the broadcast, or should I say the BroadCast, because we've got another broadcast with my brother Stephen Broad. So back to Steve. Welcome back,